can now be the subject of oversight engagements in Parliament. What I do want to highlight is the corner on the bottom left as well as the items on the right. There are far too many entities that get away with not submitting their financial statements year after year. Yes, the SAA group has had its own difficulties and been through business rescue, so they're only catching up with the submission of their financial statements now. And then you'll know that the Denel group has had its own difficulties as well. There are a few I want to highlight. The Northwest Transport Investment Group is a group that has not submitted financial statements for the last 5 years. And so that needs the constant attention, the decisive action by those in oversight. We've also got in this group the Post Office and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which has been struggling to submit financial statements on time for a number of years now. They've subsequently, in the last few months, submitted the financial statements, and now we are completing their audits. I flag these because when we put that number of outstanding, it's easy to gloss over it. But the fact that audits are outstanding does point to significant weaknesses from an accountability point of view. The ones on the right-hand side of the slide are those where the submission of financial statements tends to be late. And it's fine. Once in a while, you can have a new entity, such as the Border Management Authority, submitting financial statements late because they are in transition. That you can understand. But if you have entities, especially such as PMTE, that don't submit financial statements on time, one's got to ask some serious questions about that. I want to draw your attention, Honourable Chairs, to the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which has for many years now not submitted financials on time. And so it misses the accountability processes within Parliament. UIF, for the last 5 years, has not submitted financial statements on time, and they have a qualified audit opinion. And if you think about the significance of the amount of money that flow through the fund and the significance of the role they ought to play in our socio-economic framework, it is crucial that oversight be seized with this matter of UIF escaping oversight and accountability. For a full account of all of the audits that are outstanding and those that are delayed and those that don't submit, we do have a section in our report that deals with all of those. I come now to the audit outcomes of the high-impact auditees. We have stripped out the auditees that are significant in terms of the budget that they manage, but also significant in terms of their service delivery imperative. So we highlighted a number of departments and entities, including state-owned entities, that are responsible for the delivery of healthcare services, education, skills development and employment, human settlements, infrastructure, transport, safety and security, water and sanitation, energy, environmental sustainability, as well as financial sustainability. Together, these high-impact auditees account for 77% of the 2 trillion rand expenditure budget. So these are the big ticket items from a service delivery point of view, but also in terms of the budget that they look after. A cursory glance on the 2 bars at the top of the page will show you that indeed, the high-impact auditees lag behind the improvement trend that we've seen. So if we're wanting to drive impact in terms of improved transparency, accountability, performance across government, we've got to worry about these big impact, high-impact auditees. The ones that have got clean audits, and you do have a few, tell us indeed and show us indeed that it is possible, even amongst the more complex and larger departments, to attain clean audits. The majority of the high-impact auditees sit in the unqualified space, and I've already articulated why this space is undesirable. A large number of them, especially the provincial departments of health and education, sit in the qualified space. And the Honourable Chairs will see that there are a few that are disclaimed or adverse. There are the one adverse for this year of the high-impact auditees is the Road Accident Fund. And I'd like to also point out the disclaimers of audit opinion being the Compensation Fund as well as CITA. Both of these have got disclaimers of audit opinion. And both of these are important institutions in terms of delivering a capable and performing government. The Compensation Fund, for the last 12 years, has had a disclaimer of audit opinion. Every single year, it manages a significant budget made up of contributions from employers. This past year, 11 billion rand went through the Compensation Fund. And the question has got to be, what will it take to get the Compensation Fund properly attended to in terms of moving it out of this space where accountability, transparency, and oversight and good governance are clearly being ignored? Fortunately, we can report that the high-impact auditees are improving. However, they are lagging behind the trend. The next two slides, I won't spend too much time on, honourable chairs. Safe to say that the quality of financials that are being submitted to us still needs attention. So although audit outcomes have improved, there are far too many instances where we can see that financial management practices are not yet sound. And the good thing is that the improvements tell us of what's possible. The benefit of having had a stable financial reporting framework that has not changed for too long, the benefit of having had stable finance management units in those institutions, as well as the benefit of having internal audit and audit committees actually fulfilling their duties, we're seeing an improvement. What we need to do is get more and more of that happening across the board. The next slide sets out the outcomes in terms of the service delivery reporting. We've seen some improvement in service delivery reporting for PFMA over the last 5 years, and much of the credit goes to the role played by the DPME as well as the offices of the Premier. And also some credit goes to the leaders of different sectors, particularly in health, as well as education and human settlements, where there's been attention to ensuring that there is a journey of improving the indicators, the performance indicators, and clarifying the targets that should form part of the annual performance plans and annual performance reports of the different departments. There is still much more to be done. And especially if we look at where we are now, where the 7th administration is thinking carefully about their 5-year plan, it's going to be crucial that we don't wait too long to get the key practices that make for good performance management properly instilled. We've seen an improvement over the course of the 6th administration. We are highlighting the urgency with which these disciplines ought to be instilled as the 7th administration begins its tenure. Things like excluding key performance indicators from the annual performance report. Those disciplines have got to be attended to. Things like over-relying on manual systems. Things like not investing in the skills and disciplines that make for proper planning, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on performance. Those have got to be attended to. The tendency of people to want to deal with performance off the books, away from the public-facing annual performance report, that has got to be dealt with. The reason we say this is that far too many accounting officers, instead of investing in correcting their problems around skills or information systems or just basic management disciplines, they choose to rather take indicators out of their performance report. And of course, that compromises transparency, and it does weaken the ability of yourselves as oversight to see how budgets are being spent, to see how the things you've agreed to as the strat plans, in the strat plans, are being actually implemented. It does also compromise the ability of oversight to report to citizens on how their needs are being met. The next area of our work deals with the procurement processes. I will just highlight from a high level here that the disciplines on procurement management, supply chain management, contract management, those remain weak. The same issues that we've reported on for a number of years prevail. We see that one of the highest areas of non-compliance relates to quality of submissions of financial statements, but the majority of compliance findings relate to managing procurement, making sure that the course of deploying public resources through acquiring either services or goods that those processes are compliant with the procurement prescripts. What we see all too often is that there isn't enough attention and posture that insists on compliance with the rule of law. And so for as long as that prevails, there'll be leakage in the system, because what happens is that the goods and services being procured are not being procured in a manner that's fair, that's transparent, that provides equitable access to opportunities, and in a manner that does drive cost effectiveness. And as a result, far too many government entities end up overpaying for goods that they could get much cheaper on the market. They end up paying suppliers and contractors that don't deliver or deliver poor quality work. And of course, that causes much greater leakage. There is some concern about the extent of the different legislations and prescripts and regulations that deal with procurement that need to be changed, and that may well be true. What we have been observing over many years is that at the point of procurement, the skills, the information systems, and the shared disciplines remain inadequate. Which then brings me to the first area of risk that we are presenting for the attention of the 7th Administration and the 7th Parliament. As we think about where we're going as a country and wanting to ensure that we use the resources we have much more efficiently in pursuit of our ambitions, we've got to worry about these risks. The first one is about weaknesses in procurement and contract management. We're still seeing very high instances of non-compliance, which leads to high levels of irregular expenditure. And as I said, often people want to trivialize these things. Fortunately, the MI process, which I'll come to in a moment, has helped us link non-compliance with financial loss. And so we can, in many instances, debunk any myth that says that non-compliance is just one of those things we can ignore. We really cannot ignore it. We've got to insist on compliance with the rule of law. We've got to insist on prudent financial management. In spite of the public service regulations providing that public servants ought not to do business with the state, we're finding that there are still instances where that happens. There have been improvements over time, but it's still happening. The next area of risk we'd like to point out, Honourable Chairs, is in the delivery of infrastructure. The delivery of basic services requires proper, well-maintained infrastructure. The growth of our economy is being going to be underpinned by more investment in infrastructure as we go forward. So we believe that it is timely for the Audit Office to continue to focus on this area of infrastructure delivery, but also on maintenance of existing infrastructure. We have gone to visit a total of 143 projects across the country. And we have looked at them in terms of assessing whether their planning disciplines are appropriate, whether there are weaknesses as they implement projects, whether the management of existing projects is going well, and even the disciplines that make for proper commissioning of projects that have already been invested in. We have found problems in each of those areas. In at least 86% of the auditees where we visited projects, we found problems. And those problems relate to poor maintenance of existing infrastructure. They relate to project delays. In 64% of the projects were delayed. On average, of the projects we looked at, there were delays that amounted to about 34 months relative to what was planned and promised and what was ultimately delivered. And we also looked at the quality of the infrastructure work, the construction work that had been delivered, and we found problems there. And here we found that consultants and even employees of government departments were signing off for payment where projects were not at the right quality or at the right level of completion. And we also found instances where assets are invested in and they are not being brought into use. So we are raising these key risks in the belief that if they are appropriately attended to, the benefits of investing in infrastructure over the coming years will flow much better. The multiplier effect into the economy that should follow big investment in infrastructure will flow if we attend to these issues. The root causes to these problems relate to skill, Yes, this is true. In many, many implementing sites, there are far too many people that don't have the skills that are relevant for what they're supposed to be doing. The disciplines of ensuring that we don't pay for things we've not received, which is not so much a skill thing, but more a discipline issue. We find that that still is weak, and it results in leakage from the system. We've also found the same problems we've raised before around coordination, especially across the spheres of government, where you'll have an infrastructure program, either by a provincial or a national department, let's say, of human settlements, and houses are built, but then the infrastructure that should support it, whether for electricity or water or sanitation services or even roads, that infrastructure is not in place. And so the project cannot now be handed over to the intended beneficiaries, and people can't benefit from what's been invested in. And often that infrastructure gets vandalized because it's not being used appropriately, which then increases the risk of having to spend more money either safeguarding and then also refurbishing that which has been vandalized. So we would invite the honourable chairs and all that have responsibilities in the 7th administration to really be seized with this area. Another area of risk that we're pointing out is about the IT function of government. We're finding that over time, there hasn't been adequate attention to strengthening the IT function of government. How software licenses are procured, how IT projects are being run, how access controls are being firmed up, how in the midst of growing threats to cybersecurity, especially amongst governments, how that is not being attended to. We are continuing to raise issues even about the lack of integration of government databases, which does influence the efficiency of spend. The honourable chairs may recall that a few years ago, in the midst of the COVID emergency, we conducted real-time audits. And my office was able to share with government and with Parliament the key risks and the problems that the fragmented databases cause in terms of dealing with different programs, whether it was about access to social relief grants and the like. About a year ago, we also shared with Parliament the work we had done in the higher education and training sector, where we could show the problems of not integrating the execution of different programs and not using IT services to ensure that you don't pay for people who shouldn't be getting particular benefits, and we're not denying other people the benefits that should accrue to them. So those weaknesses prevail, and we're still seeing that there needs to be much greater attention to the skill set in IT, to the infrastructure that's there that needs to be modernized, to the integration of databases. We're seeing that we need to get better at managing the contractors that we appoint, the third parties, ensure that we get the best quality of spend and the benefits associated with our investment are realized. Some of the things we see would be such as at the Department of Labour, paying over 200 million rand for software licenses is not using. Those are key disciplines that should be pushed, that should be strengthened so that quality of spend does increase. Coming to quality of spend, I'm highlighting yet another risk for the attention of the 7th Parliament and the 7th Administration, which is about improving how public finances are being managed so that we do get better prudence in how resources are being deployed. We're still seeing far too many instances of poor payment practices where we pay for things we don't receive, or we overpay for the things we do receive, and we end up incurring fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We end up overspending on our budgets. So we're raising the attention of Parliament to these basic fundamental management practices that need to be strengthened, especially in a space where we are in, where low economic growth prevails and there is increased pressure on the fiscus. It's going to be absolutely crucial that we push back on any tolerance for poor payment practices. Some of the examples in our report that you'll read about would be at the energy and water sector, which spent 75 million rand paying for someone to deliver training to 700 learners. Now, that training was not delivered, and yet the payment was made. Subsequent to it, we've raised the issue because as you know, the audit can only happen once there's been expenditure. And having raised the issue, there is now some work being done to try and recover money that's been lost. Some of the instances we see is where 30 million rand was paid by the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, CIRA. They paid 30 million rand for training that was simply not conducted. When we raised the matter, they then contracted once again with the service provider, got them to now subsequently conduct that training somewhat quickly. It's these payment disciplines, these financial management disciplines that need to be strengthened if we are going to get more from the money we do have. We are also raising that there is deteriorating financial health. There are a number of departments, especially those in the sector of education and the sector of health, where the financial health has been deteriorating for a number of years. And as a consequence, there are cash flow deficits at the end of the year, cash shortfalls. So in simple terms, there is spending much more than what was going to be received as a budget. The cash available in the system is being spent, the expenditure is higher than the cash available. And what then happens is that creditors suffer, because then that department has to wait for the forthcoming year's budget to pay for current year expenses. So creditors almost have to wait a lot longer to get the money out. And then it just becomes a spiral that the department struggle to get out of. We are raising some concerns still on the growing claims against government, in particular the area of the medical negligence claims. And whilst the number has now reduced to 64 billion rand across the country from the 75 billion that we reported on last year, we are still raising concern that the reduction comes not from a big change in the control environment or a big change in the reduction of instances where claims may arise, but rather from having cleaned up the databases, which is important and is worthwhile. However, the key management practices that have to make for reducing this particular risk and this negative impact on patients, those practices still need attention. And then another area of risk that we're flagging from a quality of spend point of view is about the guarantees being given to state-owned entities that are not performing. Another area of risk is about the lack of accountability and consequences. Put simply, we're still seeing that irregular expenditure goes unattended. So as you know, the Honourable Chairs, when there's a non-compliance that's identified and reported on, the law provides that the accounting officer must act in accordance with the framework that governs irregular expenditure. They must investigate the issue, they must either seek condonement, they must discipline, they must seek recovery if that's necessary, or even seek a write-off. The problem is that when they don't do that year on year, the balance grows because they don't write off the irregular expenditure. And what that tells us, the stickiness of this big irregular balance, is that the culture of tolerating non-compliance prevails. And as I said earlier, we've got to push back on this culture. We've got to put in place the key disciplines that prevent problems. But importantly, once problems are detected, we've got to act swiftly so that we change the culture. And people know that once there's been a transgression, there will be action. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, Honourable Chairs, but I dare not close without highlighting a key message that I know will be the subject of our engagement. Because every time we provide our reports, the question will come, AG, we gave you powers, what have you done with them? At the end of the 5th Parliament, there was a move to change the law, and indeed that move was successful. The Public Audit Act was amended, effective from the 1st of April 2019. And over the last 5 years, we've been implementing this new set of powers. The powers do not provide for us to put anybody in jail. The powers also don't provide for us to discipline anybody. The powers are a complementary mechanism for us to follow up on how our audit reports and our recommendations are being dealt with. The powers relate to what's called a material irregularity. And what that is that if we find a non-compliance, a breach of fiduciary duty, an instance of fraud or theft that we can link to either financial loss that's material, or to harm to the public, harm to a public sector institution, or even to misuse of a material public resource, then we can raise what's called a material irregularity. An MI is different from a normal audit finding in that we can see the direct link between, let's call it the breach and impact. Now we're also required to follow up. So we start by notifying the accounting officer, bring the issue to their notice, and calling for their urgent attention to it. And if they act in accordance with their powers in a manner that's appropriate and we deem adequate for that moment, we then allow them the space to continue to implement their plan of action. It's important that we do that because we do not step into their shoes. We don't take over the role of an accounting officer because they are the appointed steward over that institution. It's only if they fail to act that we can step in. And we step in by giving a stronger recommendation, which is then in the audit report, which is then the subject of engagement within the oversight mechanism. So within the portfolio committees, we will be engaging with parliamentarians on those stronger recommendations, which then provide for a much stronger tool, even for oversight, to drive accountability and corrective action. We can then, if that's failing, take binding remedial action. We can also refer a matter for investigation by others, such as those seized with public investigations and even law enforcement. I'm happy to report that over the course of having implemented these powers over the last 5 years, we've been able to identify a total of 292 material irregularities. And the process has led to us linking those MIs to a financial loss, combined financial loss of 14 billion rand. Out of that 14 billion rand, we've been able to get accounting officers to get back just over 3 billion rand, and that's just for the PFMA cycle over the last 5 years. Yes, we can celebrate that we've been able to protect resources of 3.39 billion rand. But there's a big jump between 14 billion rand and 3 billion rand. And the gap that sits between those two numbers is the behavior of accounting officers, who must ensure that they prevent these problems and they detect them and act on them much, much quickly. What we're seeing is that the source, the real root causes of these things are the same issues we raise in the course of our normal findings, which are paying for things we don't receive, procuring in a way that's ineffective, that's unfair, that's uncompetitive, and that's not in compliance with the law. Not ensuring that we receive value for what we are paying, not using the resources we have effectively. And these are all the responsibilities of the accounting officer as per the PFMA. Through these powers, we've been able to raise matters around the utilization or the underutilization of medical facilities. How this arises is that in the course of our audits, we'll see that the debits and credits are right, there's been a ward that's been invested in, and then we go, so we can tick the box, debits and credits are fine, financial statements are fine, but then we can go to see whether or not those assets are being used in the manner that they should be. And in a number of instances, we found that not to be the case. Whether it was that Witbank Hospital, where the neonatal ICU ward was not being used, even though there had been an investment 6 years before then. We were able to use the MI process to get the accounting officer to do what they should have been doing, which is to hire the staff that must now operate the ward and to bring the ward into use for the benefit of the public. Whether it was finding beds at George Mukhari Hospital, very expensive, high-quality ICU beds that were not being used. And we were able to then use the MI process to get those beds used, somewhat alleviating the long queues and the burden of waiting for beds by sick patients. We've also been able to use our powers to get public sector institutions to attend to matters such as not submitting financial statements, as we did in the context of NSFAS. We've also raised matters around the lack of attention to ICT, especially controls on risks to cybersecurity. At the government printing works, that worked quite well. For 2 years, they failed to submit their financial statements because they had suffered cybersecurity threats. And as a consequence, we raised our MI powers, we raised the MI, we notified the accounting officer, and out of that, the relevant controls were strengthened, and now they finally caught up with their submission of financial statements. Now, these are things that no one should wait for the AG to raise. And so I'm always at pains, Honourable Chairs, to say, yes, it's wonderful that the office can demonstrate this big impact, and I'm truly, truly proud of what my team is able to do. However, what saddens me is the lost opportunity that continues to prevail, and the need for us to worry about who is running these public institutions, in whose hands are we placing the institutions and the public resources, and to what extent are they up to the task? And up to the task in terms of being professionals who are competent, who are ethical, who will acquit themselves with conscientiousness, who will ensure that they apply discipline. We've had to use our powers to get accounting officers to discipline their own staff. And the key question we have to keep asking is, what is it about the culture that prevails in these institutions that allows for accounting officers to rather opt not to discipline staff until they're compelled to by an outsider such as the Auditor-General? Some of the other aspects we've been able to deliver as benefits of our MI powers relate to getting accounting officers to deal with weaknesses to either their scholar transport program or even to their school nutrition programs, and always trying to get them to understand how a weakness we identify relates to management practices that they need to put in place, practices which will deal with the issue we've identified, but hopefully, if they're strengthened, will prevent a recurrence. We've been able to also get people to attend to maintenance of existing infrastructure, but also improve the value of spend or the quality of spend on new projects. We've been able to use our powers to also refer matters to law enforcement. Some of the issues are being dealt with by the Hawks, by the SIU, by the Public Protector, and the National Treasury. So as I wrap up, our primary message to the 7th Administration and to the 7th Parliament is this. We've got to push back on the culture of no accountability and consequences. As Team AGSA, we'll continue to do our part. However, the moment we are in requires that everyone in the ecosystem be seized with this so that we change the culture. We've got to deal with the ineffective management of the resources we do have. And we've got to invest in much better planning, much better coordination, and disciplined execution of our programs and projects. And we believe that a key enabler to all of these things, whether it's about worrying about the infrastructure programs or the modernization and integration of government IT systems, all of these things will be enabled if we do invest decisively and unrelentingly in the professionalization of our public institutions. We believe that it is professionals who will ensure that they get the skills that they require to work alongside them. It's professionals that will make sure that they apply consequences when things go wrong, that they strengthen controls in response to audit issues. It's professionals that will make sure that they appoint the right contractors and hold them accountable. It's also professionals that will manage what is increasingly a tight budget in the context of huge service delivery demands. It is professionals that will ensure that they coordinate their efforts towards much better spending. And we hope that you can continue to work with us as Team AGSA within the oversight mechanisms to support you in your efforts so that ultimately we do change the culture within public sector institutions. Thank you very much, Chairs. I will end my inputs at this point and allow space and time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Ms. Maluleke, and we want to appreciate the presentation that you've submitted to us.
Recording in progress.
Tremendously by the work of the Auditor-General. The Auditor-General looks after the debits and credits, and also the laid down prescribed targets that departments should be pursuing, which is exactly what we should be investigating and having oversight of. So I do believe our work is complementary. We are symbiotic in our nature as chairpersons and as the Auditor-General, and I just want to celebrate that relationship and the cooperation that happens there. As Honourable Frolick mentioned in the introduction, for which I want to thank him, I do just want to point out we don't have a huge amount of time this afternoon, and it is important to note, Honourable Chairpersons, that the Auditor-General will be presenting to individual departments and unpacking the individual components for the relevant departments over the coming weeks and months. And you'll have an opportunity to drill down into specifics relating to the department over which you have oversight. But I don't want to stifle debate entirely, but noting the time constraints that we have, I do want to invite anyone who has any comment that they might like to make of a general nature that doesn't specifically relate to an individual portfolio. If there are any comments from chairpersons or questions for additional clarity that anyone would like to raise, I invite you now to raise your hands. I'm not seeing a sudden rush to the stage, but yeah, Auditor-General, Ms. Maluleke, it looks like your presentation was sufficiently comprehensive that it's given everyone something to chew on. And I'm sure as they cogitate over the contents over the coming weeks, they'll all be preparing questions for you in committee. So you need to perhaps prepare for that. But perhaps in closing, anything you'd like to add, or perhaps a response to my comments?
Okay, thank you very much, Honourable Ryder, for your comments. I agree with you.
If I can just ask you to make sure you're unmuted again, please, AG.
Okay, I think that's happened. Am I audible properly now without the echo? Thank you very much for your comments, and I want to thank the Honourable Chairs for the opportunity to share this report with you. The report is now available, and I'm sure that it'll become the subject of our engagements in the different portfolio committees. As you know, we will remain available to support you and also to get feedback from you on the areas that you would want us to focus a lot more on, but also even on how our message is assisting you or not, and how we could tweak it so that we do contribute to our ability to function much more effectively. But thank you once again for the support we enjoy from all of the portfolio committee members, all of the honourable chairs, and it would be remiss of me to also not thank the executive and those that run public institutions, the accounting authorities, the accounting officers, for their support. We wouldn't be able to complete these audits nor this report without the support that we enjoy as the supreme audit institution of South Africa. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
AG, thank you for your time this afternoon. Thanks for the first snap. We really do appreciate the work that you do, and we appreciate the offer to engage in some dialogue and have interactions that will, of course, emphasize and improve the quality of work that we're doing and taking it forward. Honourable Chairs, that brings us to the end of this meeting. Special thanks to Honourable Frolick for his part and his role, but to all of you for the work that you continue to do in your committees, individually and as a group. We thank you from Mr. Frolick and myself. We thank you for your commitment, and I think the people of South Africa are you a debt of gratitude as well. Mr. Frolick, is there anything you'd like to add as we close?
No, thank you very much, Honourable Ryder. Suffice to say that we will now look forward from the side of the National Assembly for the committees to infuse and include these audit outcomes in their programs, and also support the work that the Auditor-General is doing when they go and do oversight visits to actually go and see where the money is spent. Do we get value for money? And is it a product that we can proudly say that it's something that the people deserve? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Chairpersons. The meeting is adjourned.
Baie dankie.